Life had not been kind to Daniel. At 32, he had already seen more hardship than most men twice his age. A single father to a bright-eyed little girl named Emma, Daniel's days were a constant struggle between providing food, paying rent, and ensuring that Emma never felt the sharp edges of the poverty they lived in. His wife, Anna, had passed away 3 years ago after a sudden illness, leaving him alone to pick up the shattered pieces of their small family. Since then, Daniel had been doing everything in his power to be both mother and father to his daughter, though the burden often felt far heavier than he could carry. Every morning, he woke before dawn, slipping quietly out of the tiny apartment he and Emma called home. His work as a mechanic didn't pay much, but it kept the lights on, most of the time, and every evening he would return to Emma's excited little arms wrapping around his neck, her laughter echoing through the dimly lit rooms like sunlight breaking into darkness. She was his reason, his anchor, his everything. Without her, he knew he would have long given up. But for her sake, Daniel kept going. One cold winter night, as Daniel walked home from the workshop after a long shift, the city felt unusually quiet. The streets were slick with rain, the air heavy with the smell of wet asphalt. He pulled his worn jacket tighter around himself, his mind already drifting toward Emma, probably asleep under the patchwork blanket that had once belonged to Anna. But then, in the distance, his ears caught something strange, a faint sound like a desperate cry for help. At first he thought it was just the wind. But then he heard it again, more urgent this time. His instincts sharpened, and he quickened his pace, scanning the shadows along the deserted road. That's when he saw it. A sleek black car pulled over to the side, its hazard lights blinking faintly in the drizzle. And slumped against the steering wheel was a woman barely moving. Daniel rushed forward, knocking on the window. "Hey, are you okay?" No answer. His heart pounded as he pulled at the handle. Thankfully, it wasn't locked. The door swung open, and he saw her clearly for the first time. She was dressed elegantly, a woman in her mid-40s with sharp features that spoke of wealth and power. But her face was pale, her breath shallow and uneven. Her trembling hands gripped her chest. Without thinking, Daniel scooped her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, fragile even, despite the aura of authority that still seemed to cling to her. "Hang on," he muttered, his voice shaking. "I'm getting you to the hospital." He laid her gently in the passenger seat, slid behind the wheel and hit the gas. The car purred to life, far smoother than anything he had ever driven, clearly a luxury model. But Daniel didn't have time to notice details. He drove through the rain-slicked streets, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his eyes darting between the road and the unconscious woman beside him. "Stay with me," he whispered, though he wasn't even sure she could hear him. "Don't give up now." At the hospital, nurses and doctors rushed to take her from his arms, wheeling her into the emergency room. Daniel stood there, breathless, soaked from the rain, watching helplessly as they disappeared behind the swinging doors. He didn't know her name, didn't know who she was, but he knew that if he hadn't been walking home that way tonight, she might not have made it. Hours passed. Daniel sat in the waiting room, his legs trembling, his hands clasped tightly together. He should have gone home to Emma by now, but he couldn't bring himself to leave. Something inside him told him to stay, to make sure this stranger was going to be okay. Finally, a doctor emerged. "She's stable now," he said. "If you hadn't brought her in when you did, she might not have survived." Relief washed over Daniel, and he let out a shaky breath he didn't realize he had been holding. That's good," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. He didn't expect thanks. He didn't need it. Just knowing she would live was enough. But what Daniel didn't know was that this moment, this single act of kindness, was about to set into motion a chain of events that would change his and Emma's life forever. 2 days later, the woman woke up. Her name was Evelyn Montgomery, a powerful millionaire businesswoman known across the city for her empire of luxury hotels and sharp, no-nonsense attitude. She was the kind of woman people whispered about in boardrooms, admired for her wealth but feared for her ruthlessness. Yet, as she lay in that hospital bed, her body weak and her mind replaying the blurry memory of the man who had saved her, something inside her shifted. For the first time in years, she felt vulnerable. Mortal. Human. She asked the nurses about him, but all they could tell her was that a man named Daniel had brought her in. Nothing more. She frowned, unused to being in anyone's debt, especially someone she didn't know. but she couldn't shake the image of his face, the urgency in his eyes as he had lifted her from the car. Meanwhile, Daniel had quietly returned to his life, never imagining he'd see her again. He didn't tell Emma the details, just that he had helped someone who was hurt. Emma, always curious and empathetic, looked up at him with those big innocent eyes and said softly, "Daddy, you're a hero." Daniel chuckled, ruffling her hair, but deep down he didn't feel like one. He was just a tired man trying to get through another day. But fate had other plans. 2 weeks later, as Daniel was closing up the workshop one evening, a sleek black limousine pulled up outside. He froze, wiping the grease from his hands on a rag as the chauffeur stepped out and opened the back door. And there she was, Evelyn Montgomery herself, standing tall and composed, though still carrying the faint traces of her recent illness. The sight of her in person was surreal, almost intimidating. She didn't belong in his world of oil-stained rags and clanking tools. And yet, here she was. "Mr. Daniel, isn't it?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. Daniel nodded slowly, unsure what to say. "You saved my life," she continued, "and I don't take that lightly." He shifted uncomfortably. "Anyone would have done the same," he said quietly. "No," she replied sharply. "Not anyone. Most people would have walked by, too busy with their own lives, but you didn't. You stopped. You acted. And because of you, I'm standing here today." Daniel didn't know how to respond. All he could think about was Emma, waiting for him at home. He just wanted to finish his shift and get back to her. But Evelyn wasn't finished. She studied him carefully, noticing the tiredness in his eyes, the worn edges of his clothes. Something stirred in her chest, an unfamiliar mix of gratitude and curiosity. Who was this man who had risked everything for a stranger? And in that moment, Evelyn Montgomery made a silent promise to herself. She was going to change his life, just as he had changed hers.